Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending our webinar. I will just, I would like to just present the agenda and what we will cover today. My name is Odysseas Spiroglu, and I'm the key expert for Turkey in Horizon 2020 project. This is a project co-financed by the European Union and the Republic of Turkey. And our job is to help and support Turkish organizations in joining forces with European counterparts and participating in Horizon 2020 and hopefully in Horizon Europe. Our subject today is open science and research data management. This is one of the very important subjects across thematics in Horizon Europe. And we have the pleasure to have with us today Alea Lopez de San Roman. She's a policy officer from DG R&I, the Open Science Unit from the European Commission. We also have, for later sessions, Gültekin Gürdal from Open Air Project from the Izmir Institute of Technology, and Eli Papadopoulou, again from the Open Air Project from Athena Research and Innovation Center. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Çağrı Yildirim from TÜBİTAK, who will welcome you and open this webinar. Thank you. Up to you, Çağrı.
Thank you, Odysseas. Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. I'd like to thank you all of you for attending to our this training. I am an Asian contact point of Turkey for the Horizon 2020 program. Also, I am coordinator of the Turkey in Horizon 2020 project. So, let me give some technical details regarding to this event. There is an interpretation session in this event. So in the bottom, you will see the interpretation if you choose the English, and it depends on you. And our interpreter will be active during the whole event. So, and also please ask your questions via Q&A. Via Q&A, we would like to answer all your questions. And also, I'd like to thank you all the speakers for today for this valuable event, because Horizon Europe, as you know, has already started with the 1st of January, and Turkey is going to be part of this program in the for the next 7 years. Still, the negotiation process is going on, but we are just organizing such events like we are part of the Horizon Europe. So that's why please benefit from all of our trainings. Turkey in Horizon website is active, and you can see all the event recordings and the training materials. Everything is there. And in Horizon Europe, there are novelties from Horizon 2020. So open science is one of the crucial part of it. So that's why we strongly suggest you take a benefit of this event from today. And also, I'd like to tell you that Alea Lopez will be available for 1 hour here, but then she is going to leave. So that's why please ask your questions during this session via Q&A. Please do not hesitate. Thank you very much. So Odysseas, please continue.
Thank you, Çağrı. I think the first presentation is the EU Open Science Policy, and Alea will explain to us what's in the mind of European Union and how this open science policy will be implemented in Horizon Europe. Thank you. Alea?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's really a pleasure to be in this webinar. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides. I hope you can see it now.
Yes,
we can see it. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So with regard to open science, how to describe open science is a very good question, because actually there are many, many definitions of open science, and I would say that it's also an evolving concept. So we can refer to open science as a new approach to the scientific process based on cooperative work and new ways of disseminating knowledge, provide improving accessibility to and reusability of research outputs by using digital technologies and new collaborative tools. This is what we have in the Commission recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information of 2018. Another definition, for example, would be open science as a means or an approach to the scientific process based on open cooperative work, tools, and diffusing knowledge. So what is important is this cooperative work, the dissemination, access, reusability, and also the fact of sharing, early sharing of research outputs in the research process. And why do we need open science? Open science has the potential to increase the quality and the efficiency of research and innovation, creativity through collective intelligence and cross-disciplinary research, and trust in the science system, engaging both researchers and citizens. And we all know how important it is to have the quality, the efficiency, also to foster creativity, and especially in these times, but always with regard to science, to increase trust in science by the public and society. So what is the EU policy on open science? We have identified different challenges and priorities with regard to open science. On the one side, to improve the practice of research and innovation. How? Via freely accessible scientific publications, via the early sharing of all research outputs, by making all data fair. I will explain later on what we understand by fair, but that means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data, by having reproducible results, by fostering societal engagement and responsibility. And on the other hand, but also complementary, of course, to the first part, is the development of the proper enablers, such as infrastructures, including the European Open Science Cloud, a research system that rewards and incentivizes researchers to adopt open science practices with appropriate metrics and appropriate skills and educations, including for research integrity. So those are the main challenges and priorities that we identified for open science and that we are aiming to tackle through our different actions. And how do we support open science? How does the European Commission support open science? So as you know, the European Commission has different roles. We are, of course, a funder, and through our funding programs, mainly through the framework programs for research and innovation, Horizon 2020, and now Horizon Europe, we support open science. How? Via the requirements that we have for open science and for open access, by funding for the uptake of such policies in member states, and by providing funding for the development of interoperable infrastructures to support open access and open science at the European level. But apart from being a funder, the European Commission can also initiate legislation and adopt different tools such as recommendations, directives. We have, for example, the 2019 recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information that I mentioned on the first slide with regard to the definition on open science. And for example, in that recommendation, we recommended member states to adopt different practices and policies, national policies and action plans with regard to different aspects of open science, such as open access to scientific publications, research data, rewards, skills, infrastructures. And even if it's a recommendation, it's an important instrument. And via the expert group of the national points of reference, the member states report back to us once a year on how they have been progressing on those aspects. We also have, for example, the 2019 Open Data Directive, in which we tackle publicly funded research data and public sector information, and we encourage the adoption of open access policies for research data and the reusability via repositories, or the 2019 Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market as part of the modernization of the EU copyright framework. For example, there an important provision for open science was the inclusion of a mandatory exception for text and data mining to allow data analytics via an exception to copyright. Another instrument, another way in which the European Commission supports open science is by engaging with you, stakeholders, and gathering your expertise, interacting with you. That is also a very important part of our support to open science. So let's say that the European Commission is fostering open science via the different roles it has as a funder, initiating legislation, engaging with the stakeholders, and gathering expertise. So we have been working on open science for several years already, but as you can see here, this is an extract from the hearing of Commissioner Designate by then. She was the Commissioner Designate, Maria Gabriel, at the European Parliament in September 2019. And already there, our Commissioner explicitly mentioned the importance of open science by saying how open science was dear to her and that she will work on it. Now more than ever, we need researchers to be able to share the results of their projects with others so that they can capitalize on the research of others. I will insist on having data that are simply reusable, accessible, of quality. So that is very important to say also that we have a very strong political support to continue working on open science. What are the lessons learned from Horizon 2020? So open science started having at its core open access to scientific publications in FP7. So we had the pilot for open access to scientific publications, and little by little, as I will explain later on, we have been broadening and enlarging the focus on different areas of open science beyond open access to publications. Even if open access to publications has remained a very important part of open science. And what have been the lessons learned during those years? There has been a progress with regard to the uptake of our beneficiaries to open access, so that is really very rewarding. We were seeing recent figures about the uptake of open access to peer review publications emanating from our projects, and we have an uptake very close to 100%, let's say around 97% for peer review scientific publications, which are available in open access, which is really, really good. Those figures are based on self-reporting of our beneficiaries, so of course we will try to have more accurate figures, and for that I would like to mention an ongoing project that is funded by the European Commission and in which Athena, PPI, my group, and UNU Merit are working with the aim to monitor open access policy of Horizon 2020, to measure the uptake of open access publications by Horizon 2020 beneficiaries and compliance with the current requirements of Horizon 2020, to measure also the uptake of the open research data pilot, and to provide the Commission advice and a process through which to monitor compliance to the policy in the future, and also to assess the progress of the Horizon 2020 open access policy to date and provide lessons learned and recommendations for the future. So actually in a few months, because the results of this project are expected in a few months, we will have this project providing us further information about that. Personally, as lessons learned in Horizon 2020, I think we can talk about what we have integrated in Horizon Europe. So we'll see, for example, this evolution. When we started with the Framework Program 7, with the open access pilot on publications to deposit and provide open access to them, then we evolved to the pilot for research data and data management. And then, as you see now, for Horizon Europe, we have broadened this. So the lessons learned have been that open access to scientific publications is clearly not enough, that we need a more encompassing policy on open science, and that it's really important not only to tackle open science via the obligations mandate that we have for our beneficiaries, but already at the evaluation of proposals. That is why open science will be embedded in the evaluation of proposals in Horizon Europe, in the grant agreement, of course, as we already had before, also in the reporting period during the project's lifetime, and also by strengthening all the obligations with respect to open access, but also with regard to responsible research data management in line with the FAIR principles. So, as I mentioned before, we started with open access to scientific publications, and now we have broadened the scope of open science. We have different topics: citizen engagement, the research assessment system. We have also tackled open science in different parts, so in the evaluation of proposals already, in the grant agreement, in the reporting. And then with regard to research data, for example, we have also seen an evolution from the focus on open access to research data to the broader concept of research data management, and in particular, with regard to responsible research data management in line with FAIR. I will further elaborate on that in the other slides. And here we have Horizon Europe legal basis, different texts. Maybe it's a little bit small, but I've added the hyperlink there at the bottom of the slide, so you can consult those documents because they have been published in the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal of the European Commission 2 weeks ago, I think on the 25th, they were published. So you can see in the legislation, under the legislation section, the Horizon Europe regulation. There is also the draft model grant agreement for Horizon Europe. And then you can see the provisions that we have with regard to open science. So for Horizon Europe, what are these provisions for open science? We have provisions mainly on open access to peer-reviewed publications, then provisions on research data management, and also provisions for the validation of research results. With regard to open access to peer-reviewed publications, our beneficiaries have an obligation to ensure deposition at the time of publication in a repository and to provide immediate open access via the repository. So to tackle some of the myths that usually surround our policy, we are not forcing our beneficiaries to publish. It's completely up to them to decide whether to publish or not. But if they decide to publish, their publications, peer-reviewed publications, have to be open access. And they can choose the publication venue where they want to publish. But in any case, they will have to provide open access via the repository. So, for example, a beneficiary, a researcher that decides to publish in an open access journal could think, okay, since I'm already publishing in an open access journal, it's fine. I provide open access via the journal, so I satisfy the requirements of the European Commission. No, even in that case, the researcher will have to deposit the publication in the repository and provide immediate open access via the repository too. An important provision that we have in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement is that beneficiaries or authors must retain sufficient IPR, intellectual property rights, to comply with the open access requirements. Why? Because sadly, many often we still see beneficiaries giving away their rights to certain publishers and then not being able to comply with their open access obligations. So now we explicitly mention in the Model Grant Agreement and also in the Horizon Europe regulation that beneficiaries or authors, because sometimes the copyright owner is not the author but the institution to which the author belongs, must make sure that they retain enough IPR to comply with the open access requirements that are in this slide. So the deposition, immediate open access. They also need to provide immediate open access to their publication by applying open licenses. So a Creative Commons by a license or equivalent for journal articles. And we will allow CC BY non-commercial or CC BY non-derivatives or equivalent licenses for long text formats, such as books, monographs. This is relevant for the social sciences and humanities. And for this provision, we had different meetings with the stakeholders, representative of the SSH, and this is what we thought in the end would represent better their requirements and concerns. Beneficiaries can publish in venues of their choosing. They can decide where to publish, in which journal, in which platform, but publication fees article processing charges or book processing charges will only be refundable if the publishing venue is full open access. So if we have a beneficiary that decides to publish in a hybrid journal, what is a hybrid journal? It's a journal in which part of the content is openly accessible to everyone, but part of the content is closed and only accessible to subscribers. In that case, our beneficiaries, of course, will be allowed to publish there, but the cost, the article processing charges of publishing there will not be eligible costs for the European Commission. And then metadata of deposited publications and also of research data must be open under a public domain dedication or equivalent license in line with FAIR principles. In the case of research data, it can be closed if there are legitimate reasons for that. So those are the basic requirements with regard to open access to peer-reviewed publications in Horizon Europe. The position in a repository and open access to it, immediate open access, and open licenses. With regard to research data, as I mentioned before, there has been an evolution from the focus on open access to research data in previous framework programs to the focus on responsible research data management. So what we have now is an obligation to manage the digital research data that is generated in the action responsibly, in line with the FAIR principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. All projects that generate research data must establish and regularly update a DMP, a data management plan. And as soon as possible, and within the deadline set out in the DMP, they will have to deposit the data in a trusted repository and ensure open access via the repository under those open licenses, following the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. What does this principle mean? It means that there are exceptions to the openness of research data. It can be providing open access to research data can be against the legitimate interest of the beneficiary. It can be contrary to EU competitive interest or to other constraints, privacy, security issues. In those cases, research data can remain closed. So there is no obligation to have research data always open. There are exceptions to the openness of research data. This is what the principle as open as possible, as close as necessary refers to. And with regard to the concept of trusted repository, we will provide information on what we understand by a trusted repository in the annotated grant agreement. So as you may know, there is the model grant agreement for our beneficiaries, and then we have guidance that we provide in the annotated grant agreement. We are currently finalizing this annotated grant agreement. It will be published here in the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal under guidance, and then we will provide further information on what we understand by trusted repositories and ways of compliance with the complying with the obligations. And also, where it's very important, beneficiaries will have to provide information via the repository about any research output or any other tools and instruments needed to reuse the data. And also, another very important aspect of Horizon Europe with regard to open science are the provisions for the validation of research and other research outputs. So as I mentioned now, with regard to research data, beneficiaries will have to provide information via the repository about any research output or any other tools and instruments which are needed to validate the conclusions of publications or to reuse or validate the data. So we believe that validation of research results is a very important part of open science, and we ask our beneficiaries to provide information about the tools that are needed to validate. We will also have a recommendation in the annotated grant agreement, that guidance document that I mentioned, for open access to other research output. Since our obligations focused on open access to publications, peer-reviewed scientific publications, and research data, we will encourage our beneficiaries to provide open access to other research outputs. And then we have specifically for validation of publications, a provision that says that access must be provided to data or other research outputs needed for validation of the conclusions of those publications, unless open access is already provided, and to the extent that their legitimate interest or constraints are safeguarded. Here again, if our beneficiaries decide to publish, we should be able to have access to the research outputs that are needed to validate the conclusions of that publications, unless there are legitimate interests that prevent this access. So those are the main provisions that we will have on open access in Horizon Europe. Another very interesting initiative that is currently under development is Open Research Europe. And this is also part of the many ways that the European Commission supports open science beyond framework programs, for example, via funding initiatives or actions such as this one. So what is Open Research Europe? Open Research Europe is a new publishing platform supported by the European Commission for Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe beneficiaries. It's an optional service that is very important. We are not forcing our beneficiaries to publish in this publishing platform. It's just an additional option they will have. They can decide where to publish, in which journal, platform, but they may decide they want to publish in Open Research Europe. Also, a very important point is that it's at no cost to them. It's a publishing platform, an open access publishing platform, at no cost to our beneficiaries, which has an international advisory board. And I've added there the link to the website and the Twitter handle so that you can follow it if interested, because it will be officially launched during the month of March. How does this platform work? There is a submission, an article is submitted, there are some pre-publication checks, the preprint is published, there is swift publication as preprint, then the peer review, the revised version, which is published, and then is sent to indexers and repositories. So as you can see, it's also an innovative platform, open access publishing platform, optional, at no cost to our beneficiaries, open peer review, which is also a very important part of open science and something that we want to encourage at the service of our beneficiaries. What are the benefits of such a platform? It's efficient, it has rigorous open peer review, which is rapid and transparent, the International Scientific Advisory Board that I mentioned. It's stress-free and also impactful, immediate open access with article-level metrics and open data for reproducibility and reuse. And the European Open Science Cloud, it's also another very important initiative with regard to open science that the European Commission, together with the stakeholders, is developing. The European Open Science Cloud will federate existing and emerging infrastructures to offer a trusted and open distributed system for the scientific community, providing seamless access to data and interoperable services, addressing the whole research data lifecycle. The EOSC, as we call the European Open Science Cloud, will enhance the possibilities for researchers to find and share publications, software, data, leading to new insights and innovation, higher research productivity and solutions for society. And the European Open Science Cloud engages all relevant stakeholders to co-design and deploy a web of fair data and related services for science. The EOSC past and future. So between 2019 and 2020, there has been the governance, the executive board, and a governance board. There have also been 6 executive board working groups on fair, architecture, landscape, rules of participation, sustainability, training, and skills, which have delivered an impressive corpus of information, 19 published reports, which you can consult on the website. there is a smooth transition from a project-based implementation to phase 2 as of 2021 and into the co-program partnership. And the new EOSC association, which has been founded on the 29th of July of 2020. So it was established by 4 founding members and as an ASLB-BL under Belgian law with legal personality. The first General Assembly took place in December and included the following topics. And following this first General Assembly, the EOSC Association included 149 members and 49 observers, of which 19 are mandated organizations representing national interests. And there have been several applications for membership submitted since then. What are the next steps for the EOSC Association? To complete its organizational structure and operating systems, adopting bylaws, new members, recruiting Secretary General and other staff, the website that you can check there through that hyperlink, which is under construction, and the draft EOSC MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to undergo internal commission approval procedure. And this MOU is expected to be signed by the Commission and the EOSC Association towards May, thus kicking off the EOSC co-program partnership under the Horizon Europe Framework Program. So those are some topics that we are covering under the Open Science agenda of the European Commission. Of course, it's very hard to talk about everything we are doing in 20 minutes, but other very important topics in our agenda also include research assessment, which is key, and careers, because open science will not develop its full potential unless the research assessment system also changes. And also other topics such as citizen science, reproducibility. So those are this is just an overview of the main topics we are covering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alea. We have received one question so far, and this is regarding publishers. And a participant here asks, what are the measures that the European Commission plans to take against publishers that asking for high publication fees, transforming their free-to-publish journals into ones that require fees, and if there is any such measure?
For publishers that ask fees for publication fees, APCs that are very high.
Yes, this is a question. Basically, if I understand well, it's they transform their free-to-publish journals into and ask, high publication fees. If I understand the question correctly.
So I would say, on the one hand, there is those publishers that, in order to publish, are asking for very high publication fees. Some of them, because a very important aspect is that what is known as gold open access publishing, those publishing providing open access publishing, the vast majority do not charge publication fees, but some of them do charge them, and some of those fees can be very, very high. So it's true that we don't have a cap on the APC that we will fund, but of course, all the costs under Horizon Europe have to be reasonable costs. So also this is something that our beneficiaries have to balance and to check, because all costs in a grant have to be a reasonable cost and to see. And with regard to the transformation, because I don't know if I understood that well, so on the one hand, the high article processing charges some publishers might charge, and on the other hand, the charges maybe to transform the business model, I guess. So we have different actions in which we want to support all the stakeholders and the different actors in the research ecosystem. So I would encourage them to check the work programs and see if there is something for that. So, but I didn't get that question very well, so I don't know if I'm responding to what the person really wanted.
I hope we are, otherwise we'll get some clarifications later.
Yes, please.
Okay, another question is the open access data portals are very important. for example, satellite images, data sets, will this data be open for all researchers? Well, I guess it's up to this data, but I don't know if you have anything to comment. I suppose that the Open Science Cloud will do some work for that.
Yes, I would say for data, it always depends. So our focus is really on the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So our focus is on having that data and then accessibility being one part of that. But as I mentioned, we always allow for exceptions. So it can be the possibility of having data which are closed for access, but at least they should be findable and accessible, interoperable, but we allow for exceptions to the openness of data. So I wouldn't say that all data have to be open to everyone. No, there are exceptions that we really need to take into account and acknowledge.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about Open Research Europe platform. It's not open yet, is it? It will open sometime in March, you said?
It already accepted submissions, I think, since November 2020. Okay. But the official launch will be, yes, during the month of March. So I really encourage people to check the website, Twitter. They are very active on Twitter, and to see if it could be a possibility for them to publish there. Because really, it's a very exciting project. I think it's a very good option, quite high quality at no cost, very innovative publishing system with open peer review. So it's really a very good example of open science in practice. So I would really encourage those interested to go and check the website or follow on Twitter to see.
Very good. We got a clarification regarding the first question about open science policy. And our participant here asks, is publishers start to exploit the open science policy, and what are the planned measures? I don't know what he means by exploiting.
Yes, the publisher exploiting our policy. These are taking benefit of our policy.
Yes.
Odysseus, Char, maybe we can give a voice to him so that.
Yes.
Is that okay for you, Ali? Okay.
Yes, sure.
I will also slides about this issue.
Please.
Yeah, I will answer this question.
Okay, excellent then. Okay, thank
you. While we are doing that, there's another question about creating software services for reproducible research and executable articles. We would like to offer it to the European scientific community. What avenues should we follow for reaching the community? Suppose the European Science Cloud is one.
For creating software, sorry, for?
Creating software services for reproducible research and executable articles.
Okay. Yes, I would also encourage them to check the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, to see if it fits. Also the work programs, because as you know, we have Horizon Europe, we have the different work programs to see if any support on those developments can be provided through them, to see what is under research infrastructure, the different topics. So I would encourage, we are just preparing everything, so to check what is coming out in the coming months, to see where it can fit.
Very good.
Odysseus, I see a raise a hand, so can I give a allowed to talk?
Yes. I don't know if I can do that. Please do, Stari.
Miss Nur Fındıkçınar, I see you raise a hand. If you have a question, please feel free to ask. You can unmute yourself. Okay, maybe it was a wrong. So I can, okay. I think she didn't do it purposely, so okay.
Again, you wanted to add something on the exploitation of publishers.
Yeah, I will give you much more information about what's happening in this issue.
Okay, good, excellent.
Chari, did you want to add anything on a national repository called Aperta.
Actually, we have colleagues from the TÜBİTAK, which is Ulakbib. Maybe they can give a feedback on this if they would like to. Let me see. I see. Huh? Okay. Let's see.
Çağrı, if you want, I have also slide about Aperta.
Okay, then excellent. We don't have a point then in the.
Yes.
Okay, Odysseus.
It will be discussed later on.
We will. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we are right on schedule. We can proceed to the second presentation, the one by Gültekin, and I'm sure many questions will be answered there. In the meantime, participants can also post questions in the Q&A session, and we will respond to them later on. And after that presentation, we can take a break. So, Gültekin, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. I shared my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, we can see
my screen. Okay. I will make my presentation in Turkish. Öncelikle bu organizasyonu gerçekleştiren tüm ekibe teşekkür etmek istiyorum. I would like to close my interpreter because I'm hearing you. Organizasyonu gerçekleştiren ekibe teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Çevirmenlerin sesini duyuyorum. Nasıl?
Gültekin Bey, aşağıdaki opsiyonlarda interpretation'ı off yapmanız gerekiyor. Belki bir tanesini seçmiş olabilirsiniz. Onu off yaparsanız şeyi seçerseniz Zoom üzerinden interpretation'da off'u seçerseniz çevirmenlerimizin sesini duymazsınız.
Buldum Çağrı Bey.
Tamamdır,
teşekkür ederim. Buldum. Çünkü çok zor olacaktı öbür türlü. Şimdi tekrar bir paylaşayım ekranımı. Niye paylaşamadım? Ekran paylaşımını kaybettim.
Gültekin Bey, dilerseniz tekrardan açın sunumu, daha sonra screen butonuna basın.
Tamam. Şu anda açtım sunumu. Görüyor musunuz? Sunumu görüyor musunuz?
Maalesef göremiyoruz Gültekin Bey.
Göremiyorsunuz. Fakat Çağrı Bey, paylaşamıyorum sunumu. Sunumu paylaş kısmını göremiyorum. Onu kaybettim. Yardımcı olabilecek kimse var mı acaba ekipte? Pardon. Şimdi tamam. Şimdi geldi. Tamam. Tamam. Şu anda geldi değil mi?
Geldi hocam.
Çok özür dilerim ya bu durum için. Öncelikle tekrar teşekkür ediyorum. Katılanlara da teşekkür ediyorum. Açık erişim konusunda Türkiye'de neler yapılıyor? Avrupa Birliği'nde neler yapılıyor? OpenAir nedir? Bu konularla ilgili size bir bilgi vermek buradaki benim görevim. Ben İzmir Yüksek Teknoloji Enstitüsü'nde Kütüphane Daire Başkanı olarak çalışıyorum. Aynı zamanda OpenAir projesinde Ulusal Açık Erişim Yardım Masası'nda görevliyim. Aynı zamanda TÜBİTAK ve YÖK Açık Bilim Komitelerinde üyesiyim. Şimdi sunumuma geçiyorum. Öncelikle Türkiye'nin yayın performansından birazcık bahsetmek istiyorum. Şimdi 5 yıllık bir pencereye baktığımız zaman 207 bin civarında yayın yapılmış bu 5 yıllık pencerede. Ve burada Field-Weighted Citation Impact diye görünen bir rakam var. Bu rakam da 0.95. Bu Sayval'dan alınmıştır. Elsevier Sayval'dan alınmıştır bu veriler. Dünya ortalamasına Türkiye'nin bilimsel yayınlarının katkısı, alan katkısını gösteriyor bu rakam. Dünya ortalaması 1. Türkiye yayınlarıyla şu anda dünya ortalamasının altında, 0.95 altında bir katkısı var. Ve bu yayınlara baktığımız zaman da işte uluslararası işbirliğiyle yazılan makale sayımız %24, işte sanayi işbirliğiyle yazılan makale sayımız 1.4 gibi bir rakam var ve buradaki durumumuzu biraz sonra neden bunlardan bahsettiğimi de anlatacağım size. 2020 yılına geldiğimiz zamanki yayın sayılarına baktığımız zaman ise şöyle bir tabloyla karşılaşıyoruz. Dünyada 3.515.000 civarında 2020 yılında bilimsel yayın yapılmış Scopus verilerine göre. Bu yayınlardan 57.787 tanesi Türkiye'de yapılmış ve 1.64 civarında dünyadaki yayın sayısına bir katkımız olmuş. Bu yayınların ne kadar açık erişim diye baktığımız zaman yine Scopus verilerine göre dünyadaki yayınların %39.54'ü açık erişim olarak yayınlanmış. Türkiye'deki yayınların ise %34.18'i açık erişim olarak yayınlanmış görünüyor. Şimdi pandemi sürecindeyiz biliyorsunuz ve bütün dünya şu anda bu süreçlerle başa çıkmaya çalışıyor. Ve burada da tıp konusunda neler yapılmış diye baktığımız zaman dünyada 943.000 tıp konusunda makale yayınlanmış. Türkiye'de 20.000 civarında makale yayınlanmış. Ve oran olarak da açık erişim oranlarına baktığımız zaman dünyada tıp konusunda %47, %41'de Türkiye'de yaklaşık benzer rakamlar. Anahtar kelime olarak COVID-19 diye seçtiğimiz zaman baktığımızda ise bir anda 84.000 yayın sayısı var. Türkiye'de 1589 ama açık erişim rakamlarına baktığımız zaman %80 civarında dünyada yine %86 civarında Türkiye'de bir yayın sayısı görüyoruz. Yani pandemi dönemindeki yayınların neredeyse tamamına yakını açık erişim olarak yayınlanmış COVID-19 ile ilgili. Bu pandemi döneminde açık erişim, açık bilim gerçekten hayati derecede önem taşıdı. Neden Avrupa Birliği'nin, neden dünyanın açık erişim konusunda, açık bilim konusunda ısrarla projeler yaptığını ve neden desteklediğini bir kez daha gözler önüne serdi. Burada açık bilimin çok küçük bir parçasından bir örnek de vermek istiyorum. Burada açık bilimin öneminden birazcık anlatabilmek için. Şu anda dünyada açık aşı çalışması yapılıyor pandeminin başlamasıyla beraber. Şu anda da faz 3 deneyleri yapılıyor ve çok kısa zaman sonra da umuyorum açık aşı bütün dünyanın kullanımına sunulacak. Tamamen patent free olarak sunulacak ve ülkeler buradaki formülü alıp kendileri aşı üretebilecek. Hem Hindistan hükümeti hem Amerika buradaki bir takım foundation'lar, Gates Foundation bunların başında bunu destekliyor. Niye? Çünkü şu anda neredeyse 130'a yakın ülkede hala bir doz bile aşı yapılmadı ve gerçekten aşıya büyük bir ihtiyacımız var. Yine aynı şekilde açık bilimin sayesinde yine bir açık ilaç yine pandemiyle ilgili. Bu da şu anda testleri tamamlandı ve bütün dünyanın kullanımına tamamlanıyor ve dünyanın kullanımına sunulacak. Yine bu dönemde açık bilim nelere yardımcı oldu? Biliyorsunuz herkes maske, herkes siperlik, herkes işte solunum cihazları birçok alanda ihtiyacı oldu. Ve yine açık lisanslarla, açık tasarımlar bu dönemde de herkesin yardımına koştu bütün ülkelerin. Ve bu tasarımlar bütün ülkelerde açık lisanslarla üretilebildi. Şimdi birazcık açık bilimden önce açık erişimin ne olduğuyla ilgili, çünkü bu toplantıya çok farklı katılımcılar var, onlar için de yeni olabilir. Açık erişimle ilgili ilk konuşmalar 2001'de başladı ve Budapeşte'de bir açık erişim inisiyatifi toplandı ve orada bir açıklama yaptı bununla ilgili. Burada tabii bu açıklamanın ana kaynağı şuydu: bilimsel literatüre internet aracılığıyla finansal, yasal, teknik bariyerler olmaksızın erişilebilir, okunabilir, kaydedilebilir, kopyalanabilir ve yazılabilir olması. Ve bununla ilgili de en önemli şey bunların tamamının kamuya ücretsiz bir şekilde açılması. Buradaki en önemli motivasyon neydi? Açık erişimin yeni ve yenilik yaratacak araştırma çıktılarına çevrim içi ve ücretsiz kullanım hakkı olması. Bu gerçekten en önemli kısmı. Bilgiye özgürce ulaşabilmek, yeniden kullanabilmek ve bunun üzerine yenilikler yapmak ve inovasyonu, ilerlemeyi bu şekilde sağlamak. Şimdi neden açık erişim? Şu anki yayın dünyasında aslında benim klasik kullandığım saatlerimden biridir. Bu bir ahtapot söz konusu. Çünkü şu anda yapılan bütün araştırmalar 3 defa fonlanıyor. Biz kamu olarak araştırmacıların maaşını ödüyoruz. Araştırmacıların araştırmaları için bir para ödüyoruz. Ayrıca kütüphaneler aracılığıyla bu yapılan yayınları yayın evlerinden geri almak için tekrar abonelikler para ödüyoruz. Böyle bir sistem yok. Tamamen yayın evlerini zengin etmek üzerine kurulmuş bir sistem. Ve işin en acı tarafı da tüm dünya araştırma harcamalarının 1/3'lük kısmını insanların %90'ının erişemeyeceği araştırma sonuçlarını yayınlamak için harcıyor. Yani çünkü bu yayınları görebilmek için, bu araştırma sonuçlarını görebilmek için bu yayın evlerine abone olmak zorundasınız. Ve model değişmeli. Artık ücretsiz yayınlama ve okumak için öde yerine yayınlamak için öde, ücretsiz oku seçeneği şu anda gündemde. Biraz önce de soru vardı. Bu yayın evleri işte herkes açık bilimi destekliyor. Açık bilim çok güzel ama bu yayın evleri hala çok yüksek makale işlem bedelleri alıyorlar ve bizim yayınlarımızı açık erişim yapmamızın önünde çok büyük bir engel olarak duruyorlar diye. Evet, çok doğru. Hala çok büyük bir direnç var. Ama bütün dünyada artık dönüştüren anlaşmalar yapılıyor. Buna transformative agreement deniyor. Şu anda Avusturya, Finlandiya, Almanya, Macaristan, Hollanda, Norveç gibi ülkelerde büyük konsorsiyumlar yayın evleriyle yaptıkları anlaşmaları dönüştüren anlaşma, transformative agreement yapıyorlar. Burada araştırmacılar yayınlarını açık erişim yapmak istediklerinde yayın evine hiçbir şekilde para ödemiyorlar. Yayın evleriyle yapılan anlaşmalar, abonelik anlaşmalarında bu konuda sistemin içinde oluyor ve siz hiçbir şekilde ben nasıl yayınımı açık erişim yayınlarım diye düşünmüyorsunuz. Bugün işte bir Elsevier'de de, Springer'de de, Weil'de de bir makale yayınlamak isterseniz, mesela Avusturya'daki bir araştırmacıyım ben, Avusturya adresli bütün araştırmacılar bu yayın evlerinde yaptıkları yayınlara herhangi bir ücret ödemiyorlar. Abonelik bedelinin içinde bununla ilgili de bir pazarlık yapılarak bu konu çözülmüş durumda. Mesela Hollanda'da en son yapılan anlaşmalarda artık tamamen 2024'te itibaren tüm yayın evlerindeki yayınlar açık erişim olarak yayınlanmaya başlanacak. Biraz önceki konuşmacımız da söylemişti. Bu bir geçiş dönemi, bu bir dönüşüm dönemi. Yeni modellerden bu sistem daha sağlıklı bir şekilde dönüşecek. Neden açık erişim? Çünkü açık erişim, yayının açık erişim hızını kesinlikle erişim hızını artırıyor. Hem yazan kişinin hem de yayının görünürlüğünü artırıyor. Dünya çapında etkisini gerçekten artırıyor ve keşif araştırmaya olanak sağlıyor ve de bu size daha iyi değerlendirme, daha iyi izleme ve daha iyi bir araştırma yönetimi sağlıyor. Bunların sonucunda da size inovasyon, prestij ve fon olarak bunlar size geri dönüyor. Ve yapılan çalışmalar gösteriyorlar ki en az 4 kat daha fazla makaleniz indiriliyor açık erişim olduğu zaman. En az 1.6 kat daha çok atıf alıyorsunuz ve alt metrik dediğimiz işte sosyal medya kanallarındaki mentionlarda en az 2,5 kat daha fazla artıyor açık erişim olduğunda. Ve hem bilim için yararlı, hem ekonomi için yararlı, hem de toplum için yararlı açık erişim. Soruyorlar bana başka sunumlarımda da, her şeyi mi açacağız, ne kadar açık diye. Bu da zaten bizim uzun zamandır kullandığımız bir mottomuz var. Mümkün olduğunca açık, gerektiği kadar kapalı. Ve açık erişimden açık bilime süreç geçmeye başladı artık. Amaç tüm düzeylerde bilimsel süreçleri ve çıktıları açık hale getirmek. Açık bilim nedir? Biraz önce konuşmacımız da bundan bahsetti ama ben de tekrar bir üzerinden geçmek istiyorum. Burada açık bilimdeki aslında bütün espri şurada. Bilimsel araştırma yürütmede ve yayınlamada ve değerlendirmede daha yeni, açık ve katılımcı bir geçiş. Ve buradaki en önemli şey de bütün araştırmanın bütün aşamalarında işbirliği ve şeffaflık. Ve böylelikle daha güçlü bilimsel sonuçlara erişim, daha verimli araştırmalar yapmak ve bu araştırma sonuçlarını herkesten paylaşmak. Ve böylelikle de sosyal ve ekonomik daha yüksek bir etkiye sahip olmak. Evet, iddia ediyoruz ki açık bilim araştırmanın geleceği. Sürdürülebilir bir gelecek inşa etmek istiyorsak mutlaka açık bilime ihtiyacımız var ve mutlaka açık bilime geçmeliyiz. Bu pandemi döneminde de bunu çok daha yakından hepimiz görme şansına sahip olduk. Açık bilim aslında şu anda görebildiklerimizden çok daha fazlası. Şu anda açık bilimle ilgili bir tsunami başlamış durumda. Ve biz de bu açık bilimin faydalarını sağladığı tsunami'den yararlanmak için şu anda mükemmel bir zaman. Biz de ülke olarak bu konu adımlarımızı hızlıca atmaya başlamamız lazım. Açık bilim diye bahsettiğimiz zaman aslında neleri kapsıyor? İşte araştırma altyapısı, araştırma bütünlüğü, araştırma değerlendirme süreçleri. Burada yayınlar, veriler, metodolojiler, açık yazılımlar, açık protokoller, açık hakemlik, açık eğitim, vatandaş bilimi diye bir şemsiye altında, bunların hepsini açık bilim altında toplayabiliriz. Ve burada bazı özellikleri var. İşte açık deney defteri, açık veri, araştırma verileri, açık araştırma yazılımları ve açık erişim. Tüm bunlar açık bilimin öz nitelikleri içinde yer alıyor. Açık bilim ekosistemi diye biraz böyle karmaşık göreceğin ama bütün açık bilimle ilgili detayları içeren bir grafik var. Bu grafikte de açık bilim aslında nereden başlayıp nelere evrildiği ve oradan da sonuçlarının neler olduğunu görmek mümkün. Bu ekosistem içinde kimler var? Bu ekosistem içinde tabii ki üniversiteler, kar amacı gütmeyen vakıflar, kütüphaneler, arşivler, veri merkezleri, hükümetler ve işletmeler bu ekosistemin parçaları. Ve inovasyon için aslında doğru kişi, doğru yer ve doğru zaman önemli. Bu yüzden de biz araştırma sonuçlarımızı paralı online duvarların arkasına bırakarak bunu başaramayız. O yüzden de yaptığımız çalışmalar bizim mutlaka açık erişim olmalı. Buradaki en önemli aktörlerden bir tanesi de açık inovasyon. Artık günümüzde çok ciddi bir rekabet başladı. Şirketler arasında rekabet, üniversiteler arasında rekabet ve özellikle firmaların ürünlerinin yaşam döngüsü ve yaşam süresi çok kısaldı. Herkes yenilik peşinde ve bu noktada da artık şu görüldü ki açık inovasyon önemli. Firmalar kendi fikirlerini veya firma dışından gelecek fikirleri de değerlendirmek zorunda. Başka firmalar kendi fikirlerine değer katabilirler ve bu yüzden de bir işbirliği olması gerekiyor ki açık inovasyon kendini gösterebilsin. Avrupa Birliği ve açık bilim diye geldiğimiz zaman Avrupa Birliği açık inovasyonu, açık erişimi ve açık bilimi çok önce fark etti ve neredeyse 7. çerçeve programına itibaren açık erişim, yayınlar açık erişim pilot olarak başladı. Ufuk 20 kapsamında açık erişim zorunlu hale geldi ve yaptığınız yayınları depolama ve açık erişime sunma zorunlu hale geldi. Açık veri pilottu. Ondan sonraki programda ise araştırma verileriyle ilgili veri yönetim planı sunmak, yayınlar zaten default olarak açık erişimdi. Bu oldu. Daha sonra Ufuk Avrupa programı başladı. Artık hem araştırma verileri hem de yayınlar zorunlu hale getirildi. Fakat hala opt-out seçeneği araştırma verilerinde mevcut. Nedenini belirterek opt-out seçeneğinde dışarıda kalabiliyorsunuz. Ve açık bilim artık varsayılan olarak yeni programda devam edecek. Biraz önce konuşmamızda bahsetti aslında. Gerçekten açık bilim, araştırma ve inovasyon sonuçlarının daha iyi yayılması için toplumun aktif katılımı ve desteğine ihtiyaç duyuyor. O yüzden de bunun olabilmesi için hem yayınlara açık erişim hem de araştırma verilerine açık erişim önemli. Tabii orada da bir takım standartlar var. Ondan biraz önce konuşmada da bahsetti, FAIR ilkelerinden. Burada Ufuk Avrupa programındaki açık bilimden ilgili madde 10'da ve madde 35'te bir takım bilgiler var. Bunlar işte bilimsel yerine açık erişim sağlamak zorunda. Mümkün olduğu kadar açık, gerektiği kadar kapalı ilkesi burada en önemli rehber. Ve verilerimizi FAIR ilkeleri doğrultusunda yayınlama gibi bir sorumluluğumuz var. Ve diğer açık bilim uygulamalarını teşvik etmek. Bu konuda da zaten açık bilim bulutu da şu anda devreye alındı. Ve üçüncü ülkelerle de ortaklık etmek buradaki en önemli açık bilim yaklaşımlarından bir tanesi. Yararlanma ve yaygınlaştırmayı içeren madde 35'te ise evet bilimsel yayınlara açık erişim zorunlu, yeterli fikri mülkiyet hakkı da korunmalı. Yani siz açık erişim bir ticari yayın evindeki dergide yayınınızı yayınlayıp ama bütün haklarını da oraya vermemelisiniz. Bu haklar da yine sizde kalmaya devam etmeli. Bu yayınla ilgili tasarruf sizde olmaya devam etmeli. Buna göre lisans anlaşmaları imzalamanız gerekiyor. Dediğimiz gibi verilere mümkün olduğu kadar açık, gerektiği kapalı. Burada da istisnalar mevcut. Yine verilerle ilgili fair ilkeler doğrultusunda olması bunlara önemli ve açık bilim bulutuyla ilgili de yükümlülükler burada mevcut. Şimdi Ufuk, Avrupa'da açık bilimle ilgili farklılıklar neler bu bakış açısında? Avrupa Birliği artık lider bir pazar olmak için çalışmalarını yürütüyor. Bununla ilgili de inovasyonda öncü olmasına yardımcı olabilmesi için Avrupa Birliği ülkelerinin bir Avrupa İnovasyon Konseyi kuruluyor. Avrupa çapında araç ve inovasyon çabalarına odaklanmasıyla ilgili bir girişimde bulunuyor. Ve bu kapsamda da Avrupa genelinde altyapıyla desteklenen yayınlara, verilere açık erişim gerektiren açık bilim ilkesi Horizon Avrupa programının işleyiş biçimi haline geliyor. Artık default olarak bir işleyiş biçimi haline geliyor. Biraz önce de konuşmacımız bahsetti. Hibrit dergilere destek yok. Hibrit dergiden kastımız da şu anda biliyorsunuz yayın evleri mevcut dergileri ikiye ayırdılar. Bir kapalı erişim dergiler, ikincisi de hibrit dergiler, bir de tam açık erişim dergileri var. Hibrit dergi dediğimiz dergiler hem açık erişim makale bulmak mümkün bu dergilerde hem de kapalı erişim makale bulmak mümkün. Eğer siz bir derginin içinde makalenizi açık erişim yapmak isterseniz onların belirledikleri bir makale işlem bedeli var. O bedeli ödeyerek kapalı erişim bir dergide yani hibrit bir dergide yayınınızı açık erişim hale getirebiliyorsunuz. Ön baskı yeterli olacak. Yani illaki orada yayınlanması yani hakemli değil de illaki ticari dergide yayınlanmasına gerek yok. Ön baskıda olsa yayınlanabilir. Open Research Europe'dan bahsetmişti biraz önceki konuşmacımız. Evet şu anda Mart sonu itibariyle artık burada yayınlar yayınlanmaya başlanıyor. Kasım 2020'de yayınlar kabul edilmeye başlandı. Artık siz yayınlarınızı mutlaka bir ticari dergiye göndermek zorunda değilsiniz. Kendinize bir dergi olmak zorunda değilsiniz. Avrupa Birliği'nden aldığınız fonlardan çıkan yayınlarınızı bu platform üzerinde yayınlayabilirsiniz. Burada da yayınladığınız zaman gerekleri yerine getirmiş olacaksınız. Buradaki sistemde diğer ticari dergilerdeki sistemden çok bir farkı yok. Yine makalenizi gönderiyorsunuz. Makaleniz orada değerlendiriliyor. Açık hakemlikten geçiyor ve bu değerlendirmenin sonucunda da makaleniz orada yayınlanmaya başlıyor. Adresini burada da görebilirsiniz ve buradaki adrese giderek daha detaylı bilgi de alabilirsiniz. Açık değerlendirmeden bahsetmiştim. Açık akran değerlendirmesi. Mevcut şu andaki hakemlik süreçleri nasıl dergilerde devam ediyorsa bu süreçlerin tamamen açık hale getirilmiş hali. Burada da detaylar veriliyor. Yazarlar, hakemler birbirlerinin kimliğinin farkındadır. Sizin makalenizle ilgili kim ne değerlendirme yapmış, nasıl bir rapor yazmış bunların hepsi şeffaf bir şekilde bu süreç devam ediyor. Ve böylelikle de hakemlik sürecindeki birçok şaibe de ortadan kalkmış olacak açık hakemlikle beraber. Bununla beraber tabii citation konusu da çok önemli. Bir makalenin ne kadar citation aldığı herkes için değerli. Burada da yine bağımsız bir altyapıyla Open Citation girişimi devreye giriyor ve açık bilim ekosisteminin önemli parçalarından bir tanesi yerine gelmiş olacak bu şekilde açık citation'larda devreye girdi. Burada açık araştırma verisi demiştik. Şu anda bunu sağlamak zorunda ve veri yönetim planı. Benden sonraki arkadaşım, OpenAI'de beraber çalıştığımız arkadaşım da bu konuyla ilgili size daha fazla detay verecek. Avrupa'da sadece Avrupa Birliği değil açık erişime destek veren şu anda Avrupa Birliği kapsamında yaklaşık şu anda 18 tane oldu galiba. Farklı ülkelerden bizim TÜBİTAK benzeri fon sağlayan kuruluş mevcut. Bu fon sağlayan kuruluşlar da bu Ocak ayından itibaren kendi verdikleri fonlarla ilgili yapılan projelerdeki tüm araştırma çıktılarını açık erişim olmasını zorunlu hale getirdiler. Bundan sonra artık bu ülkelerde de yapılan bu fon sağlayıcılar alınan fonlardaki makaleler ve diğer araştırma çıktıları açık erişim halde yayınlanacak. Açık erişim konusunda ve açık bilim konusunda Avrupa Birliği bu uyum sürecinde OpenAI projelerini gündeme getirdi. İlk proje 2009-2012'de OpenAir adında gerçekleşti. Daha sonra 2011-2014 OpenAir Plus, daha sonra OpenAir 2020 ve en sonunda OpenAir Advanced projesiyle bu Şubat ayının sonunda süreç tamamlandı. Çok farklı bir proje grubuydu. İçinde açık erişim uzmanları, bilim bilgisayar uzmanları, hukukçular, veri toplulukları, kütüphaneciler, vatandaş bilimiyle ilgili kişiler, 50 ortaklı bir konsorsiyumdu. Çok büyük bir proje grubuydu bu proje grubu. Ve bu pilot uygulamaların tamamında bu proje grubu hayata geçirdi. Ve 2018 yılında da OpenAir projesi bir tüzel kişilik kazandı. Ve şu anda OpenAir Derneği olarak hayatına bundan sonra proje bitimiyle beraber devam edecek. Ve açık bilim bulutuna da destek vermeye ve bu konudaki çalışmaları yürütmeye devam edecek. İzmir Yüksek Teknoloji Üniversitesi de bu derneğin kurucularından bir tanesi. Biz de yine bu konuda desteklerimizi koordinatör olarak devam ettireceğiz. Açık erişimden açık bilime geçildiğini söylemiştim. Bunu da sağlayan aslında bize sadece yayınlara açık erişim değil artık araştırma verileri, yazılımlar, metodolojiler, açık eğitim kaynakları bu şemsiyenin altındaki her şey bize açık bilime geçişi sağlıyor. Buradaki en önemli noktalardan bir tanesi de bunların tamamının birbirine bağlantılı olması. OpenAI'nin aslında 3 tane eylem ayağı oldu. Bir, altyapılar hazırladı, hizmetler hazırladı. 2, bu konuda politikaların geliştirilmesine destek verdi. Bununla ilgili çalışma grupları oldu ve hem fon sağlayıcılar için hem de üniversiteler için, araştırma gerçekleştiren kurumlar için politika örnekleri, taslak politikalar hazırladı. Ve yine bu konuda farklı çalışma gruplarıyla da eğitim dokümanları hazırladı, rehberler hazırladı. Buradaki slaytta da zaten bunları görüyorsunuz. Ben burada araştırmacıların yoğun olduğu bir grup olduğunu düşünüyorum şu anda sunumu izleyenlerin. Araştırmacılar için de farklı hizmetler sundu. Ben o hizmetlerden birazcık daha bahsedeceğim. Şu anda OpenAir portalı açık ve aktif bir portal. Şu anda 125 milyon civarında yayına erişebilirsiniz bu portal üzerinden. Yaklaşık 15 milyon civarında araştırma veri setine, 216 bin civarında yine yazılım koduna ve diğer dediğimizde 8 milyon değerinde diğer araştırma çıktısına bu bu portal üzerinden erişebilirsiniz. 78 bin civarında içerik sağlayıcı, 23 tane fon sağlayıcı büyük kuruluş da bu sistem içinde buraya veri sağlıyor. Şu anda da 3 milyona yakında projeyle ilgili bilgiye buradan ulaşabilmek mümkün. 3 farklı aşamada destek veriyor OpenAir. Bir yayınlama aşaması dediğimiz işte Zeneto, Amnezi, Argos. Bir bunları izlemeyle ilgili servisleri. Bir de bunlara ulaşabilmek için, discover edebilmek için, keşfedebilmek için OpenAir Connect ve OpenAir Explorer gibi servisler var. Bunlardan birazcık daha bahsedeceğim size. Ve dediğim dokümanları çok önemli. Açık bilim uygulamalarıyla ilgili çok farklı rehberler hazırladı OpenAir. O rehberlere de bu web sitesinden çok rahatlıkla ulaşabilirsiniz. Ve en önemli şeylerden bir tanesi araştırma verileri. Bunun üzerine de dediğim gibi bir grubu vardı OpenAir'in ve çok farklı, çok yararlı rehberler hazırladı. Bu sayfadan da açık veri yönetimi ve bu konuda yapılabileceklerle ilgili bilgileri alabilirsiniz. Açık bilimdeki en önemli şeylerden bir tanesi, veriyle ilgili en önemli şeylerden bir tanesi de verinin yeniden kullanımı. Bununla ilgili de verinin yeniden kullanımı ile ilgili bir case study sayfası yine OpenAir portalında bulabilirsiniz bu adreste. Burada da verinin yeniden kullanımı ile ilgili peyderpey yeni case study'ler eklendikçe de buraya eklenmeye devam edecek. Bu kapsamda benim de koordinatörü olduğum YÖK'te bir grubumuz var. Araştırma verisi ve veri yönetimiyle ilgili YÖK'teki açık bilim grubunun alt grubu olarak çalışıyor. Bu kapsamda biz de çok yeni bir kitabı Türkçe'ye çevirdik. Adı Veri Yönetiminde Araştırmacılarla Etkileşim adında bir kitap. Şu anda bu adreste tamamen açık olarak Creative Commons lisansıyla lisanslanmış ve herkesin kullanımına açık olarak erişebilirsiniz bu kitaba. Burada da veri yönetimi konusunda birçok örnek olayı ve neler yapılabildiği ile ilgili örnek olayları bulabilirsiniz. Burada Bir sonraki arkadaşım benden bahsedecek daha detaylı. OpenAI servislerinden bahsederken ve veriden bahsederken Argos adında bir servisimiz var. Bu servisimiz tamamen veri yönetim planı hazırlayabilmenize olanak sağlayan tamamen açık bir yazılım. Şu anda bulutta çalışıyor. Buraya girerek herhangi bir fon sağlayıcı için veri yönetim planı hazırlayabilirsiniz. Yine biraz önceki bahsettiğim bizim YÖK'teki grubumuz bu yazılımdaki arayüzü de Türkçe'ye çevirdi. Türkçe olarak da bu arayüzü kullanabilirsiniz. Ayrıca çok yeni, TÜBİTAK biliyorsunuz 1001 projeleri kapsamında araştırma veri yönetim planı hazırlamayı zorunlu hale getirdi. Biz de çok yeni, daha birkaç gün içinde, hatta dün bile diyebilirim, bu veri yönetim planını Argos'a entegre ettik ve şu anda TÜBİTAK'ın bu veri yönetim planına Argos içinden de ulaşabilirsiniz. Yine veri konusunda en önemli bizim geliştirdiğimiz hizmetlerden bir tanesi yine Amnezya adında bir yazılım. Amnezya'da veri yönetimindeki, verideki en önemli detaylardan bir tanesi veriyi anonimleştirebilmek. Amnezya'da size verilerinizi anonimleştirmenize yardımcı olan bir yazılım. Ona da buradan ulaşabilirsiniz. Covid-19 döneminde, pandemi döneminde OpenAI'nin yaptığı çok güzel çalışmalardan bir tanesi de size örnek verecek olursam, biraz önce bu 150 milyon civarında kaynaktan oluşan bir portaldan bahsettim. Orada bir takım veri madenciliği yaparak ayrı bir gateway oluşturuldu ve Covid-19 ile ilgili olabilecek sistem içindeki tüm araştırma çıktıları bir araya toplandı ve bir tarama kutusu oluşturuldu. Bu da bizim Covid-19 ile ilgili gateway'imizin adresi. Buradan da yapacağınız taramalarla sadece Covid-19 ile ilgili olabilecek yayınlara, veri setlerine, yazılımlara erişebilirsiniz. Zenado da bizim bir diğer servisimiz. Birazdan Zenado ile ilgili biraz daha detay bilgi vereceğim. Yine orada da yine Covid-19 ile ilgili bir gateway oluşturduk. Orada da yine Covid-19 ile ilgili bilgilere erişebilirsiniz. Zenado, OpenAI portalının CERN'de çalışan açık arşivi diyebiliriz aslında. Eğer kuruluş amacı şuydu, eğer kendi ülkenizde yayınlarınızı koymak için bir arşiviniz yoksa, açık erişim arşiviniz yoksa Zenado'yu kullanabiliyordunuz ve Zenado'ya kendi makalelerinizi veya çıktılarınızı koyabiliyordunuz. Şu anda bu tüm dünyaya açıldı artık Zenado. Sadece araştırmayla ilgili makaleleri değil, her türlü araştırma çıktısını, ki burada en önemli şeylerden biri de veriler, buraya koyabiliyorsunuz ve hiçbir ücret yok. Tamamen ücretsiz ve 50 GB'a kadar veriyi Zenado'da arşivleyebilirsiniz. CERN'de çalışıyor bu sistem ve çok güvenli ve her koyduğunuz araştırma çıktısı için de sistem size bir DOI numarası veriyor. Bu da koyduğunuz bütün araştırma çıktılarını çok kolaylıkla atıf yapılabilmesini de sağlıyor. Ayrıca size çok güzel de metrikler veriyor. Kaç defa kullanıldığıyla ilgili koyduğunuz araştırma çıktısının ve tüm disiplinlere hizmet veren bir servis Zenado. Şu anda da çalışır durumda ve kullanabilirsiniz. DOI'den bahsetmiştim. Bu şekilde her buraya koyduğunuz araştırma çıktısı için de bir DOI alıyorsunuz. Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu'ndan bahsetmişti biraz önce yine benden önce konuşmacı. Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu da OpenAI'den dediğim gibi işbirliği devam edecek. Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu daha yeni bir proje ve artık tamamen veri merkezli bir bilime geçiliyor ve bununla ilgili de çok farklı servis ve hizmetler olacak. OpenAI projesi de burada bu servis ve hizmetleri destekleyecek. Burada üç tane burada size dikkatine sunmak istediğim kısım var. Evet, analog bilimden sayısal bilime geçiyoruz. Avrupa'nın üzerinde bir açık bilim bulutu var ve artık araştırmalar ve araştırmacılar çok daha fazla görünür olacak. Neden Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu dediğimizde de artık araştırma verilerinin %80'i standartlara göre saklanmıyor. Veriler bizim için artık makalelerden çok daha değerli. Ve şu anda kendi kendinize de sorduğunuz zaman verilerimiz ne oluyor diye büyük bir kısmı herkesin kendi kişisel bilgisayarlarında bir zaman sonra da kaybolup kullanılamaz duruma geliyor. Oysa veriler çok çok daha değerli, makalelerden de çok çok daha değerli. O yüzden de Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu bir proje değil, bir süreç verilerle ilgili ve bu sayede Avrupa'daki farklı bilimsel fikirlerin paylaşılabileceği yeni bir başlangıç olacak ve önemlisi de araştırmalar tekrarı olmayacak. Aynı konularda farklı farklı insanlar yeni araştırmalar yapmak zorunda kalmayacak. Herkes birbirinin verisini kullanarak da sadece üzerine koyarak bilimsel çalışmalar çok daha hızlı bir hale gelecek. Ve çok hoşuma giden de bir şeydi benim. Çok fazla sınırlar koyuldu. Bu pandemi döneminde bile sınırlar kapatıldı. Hiçbir şey yapılamadı. Uçaklar kalkmadı ama bilimsel çalışmalar tarihin hiç olmadığı bir dönemindeki kadar işbirliği içinde yapılmaya başlandı. Ve Avrupa Açık Bilim Bulutu da bu köprülerin çok daha kalıcı olmasını sağlayacak. Evet, OpenAIR projesiyle ilgili bu bizim hazırladığımız bir rehber. Burada her türlü bilgiyi burada bulabilirsiniz OpenAIR projesiyle ilgili. Biraz da Türkiye'deki yapılanlardan bahsetmek istiyorum. Açık bilim, açık erişim konusunu mümkün olduğunca YÖK'ün de gündemine taşımaya gayret ettik. Çok çalışmalar yaptık. Uzunca bir zamandır devam ediyor. Şu anki YÖK Başkanımızla da, daha önceki YÖK Başkanımızla da çalışmalar oldu. Şu anki YÖK Başkanımızla da yapılan çalışmalar gerçekten çok büyük bir hız kazandı. Ve 2018'deki çalışmalardan sonra işte tezlere açık erişim zorunlu hale getirildi. Bütün üniversitelerde açık erişim arşivi kurulması zorunlu hale getirildi. İşte araştırma üniversitesi olabilmek için açık erişim yayın sayısı ve arşiv olması bir madde haline getirildi. Ve bu konuda da şu anda Cumhurbaşkanlığı'nın dijital dönüşüm kapsamında da strateji belgesine açık bilim çalışmaları girdi. Ve YÖK'te bir açık bilim komitesi oluşturuldu. Farklı üniversitelerden kişiler var bu komitenin içinde. Benzer bir komite TÜBİTAK Ulakbim'de de oluşturuldu. Yine orada açık bilimle ilgili çalışmalar devam ediyor. Ve TÜBİTAK açık bilim politikasını duyurdu herkese. Bu kapsamda da çalışmalarına devam ediyor. Şu anda dediğim gibi 1001 projesinde, 1001 programında da zorunlu hale geldi açık veri ve veri yönetim planı istemeye başladı. Biz de İzmir Yüksek Teknoloji Enstitüsü olarak 2013 yılında ilk açık erişim politikasını senatomuzdan geçip zorunlu hale getirmiştik. Daha sonra da 2019 yılında da senatomuzdan açık bilim politikasını geçirip şu anda uygulamaya koyduk ve bizde de zorunlu halde devam ediyor. Bu da bizim açık arşivimizin adresi. Bütün yayınlarımıza şu anda buradan erişilebilir. Yine TÜBİTAK'taki en önemli çalışmalardan bir tanesi bizim bu dönemde yaptığımız Türkiye'deki bütün açık erişim arşivlerini harmanlayan bir sistem geliştirildi. Türkiye Akademik Arşiv adında, adı Harman. Bu bütün üniversitelerdeki yayınları harmanlıyor. Şu anda 138 tane farklı kurumdan 2 milyon civarındaki yayını burada bulabilirsiniz. Tek bir yerden tarayarak bunlara da ulaşabilirsiniz. Dergi Park bu süreçteki en önemli çıktılardan bir tanesiydi. Şu anda 2000 üzerindeki dergiye ev sahipliği yapıyor Dergi Park. Ve sistem içindeki dergilerin tamamı açık erişim dergiler. Ve aynı zamanda Dergi Park'taki bütün dergiler OpenAIR portalıyla da entegre edildi. Dergi Park'a eklenen her bir makale aynı zamanda OpenAIR tarafında da görünür hale geldi. Biraz önce bahsetmiştim YÖK'teki araştırma verileriyle ilgili çalışma grubundan. Burası da o. Aynı zamanda yine TÜBİTAK Açık Veri Ulakbim.gov.tr adında bir adresi var. Burada da verilerle ilgili sizlere çok yararlı bilgiler mevcut. ARDEP 1001'den bahsetmiştim ve artık burada bir yönetim planı sunmanın zorunlu hale getirildiğinden bahsetmiştim. Ve yine TÜBİTAK'ın kendisi için kurduğu bir arşivdi Aperta, kendi bilimsel çıktılar için. Fakat çok kısa bir zaman içinde belki ilgili arkadaşlarım varsa bu zamanla ilgili de bilgi verirler. Aperta'da bütün Türkiye'nin kullanımına sunulup bir veri arşivi olarak da kullanılabilecek. Türkiye'deki araştırmacılar da ister Aperta'ya, ister Zenado'ya, eğer kendilerinde varsa kendi arşivlerine verilerini koyabilecekler. Burada önemli olan şeylerden bir tanesi şu, evet açık bilim gerçekten bir devrim. Bunu içselleştirmek, bundaki gerekliliklerini yerine getirmek bir devrim ve her devrimin çok büyük zorlukları var. Ve biz de bu zorlukları yaşıyoruz. Kolay değil kabul ettirmek. Yapılan çalışmaları açık olması sağlamak hiç kolay değil. Ama artık bilimi özgür bırakmak, daha çok paylaşmak için işbirliği ve güç birliği etme zamanı hepimiz için. Ve çok sevdiğim sevgili Eva'nın bir cümlesidir bu. Bilim paraşüt gibidir. Eğer açık değilse size hiçbir yararı olmaz. O yüzden bilimin mutlaka açık olması gerekir. Benim son 3-4 yıldır kullandığım klasik bir son slaytımdır bu. Hayat çok kısa ve yaptıklarımızı paylaşmaya mutlaka değer. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you, Gültekin, for your presentation. I believe we have a few questions. Could you explain a little more the closed as much as necessary, open, I guess it means closed as much, open as necessary part?
Tabii
and
ki.
To which situations do you think closed access is necessary? I mean, this is up for everyone to
I will try to explain.
Yes.
Buradaki bahsettiğimiz mümkün olduğu kadar açık, gerektiği kapalıdan anladığımız şu aslında. Biz sürekli soruluyor. Yaptığımız her şeyi mi açacağız veya ne kadarını açacağız? Bu tamamen yapılan çalışmanın kapsamına bağlı. Siz bir proje yapıyorsunuzdur. Bu projeyi sanayiden herhangi biriyle yapıyorsunuzdur. Proje yaptığınız kişi diyebilir ki verilerimizi açık erişim yapmayalım veya verilerimizin sadece bir kısmını açık erişime koyalım veya yaptığımız yayınları açık erişime koyalım, verilerimizi koymayalım veya koyduğumuz kısmı şöyle olsun, bununla ilgili bir patent alacağız, biraz daha bekleyelim. Yani buradaki anlatılmak istenen aslında bu. Bu şu anda Ufuk Avrupa kapsamındaki istisnalar da bu şekilde. Yani eğer siz yaptığınız çalışmayla ilgili bir patent başvurusu yapacaksanız veya yapıyorsanız o zaman siz bunu birazcık erteleyebilirsiniz veya o kısmını açmayabilirsiniz. Burada bahsedilen tamamen bu şekilde bir yaklaşım tarzı. Yani mümkün olduğu kadar açalım ama açılmasında sakınca var dediğimiz işte savunma sanayi ile ilgiliyse, ülkenin güvenlik ve politiğiyle ilgili bir şeyse tabii ki o noktada da gerektiği kadar kapalı halde tutalım. Evet, Açık Avrupa Araştırma Avrupa platformundaki yayınlarda evet bu double blind'ın da ötesinde buradaki açık hakemlik hem yorumu yapan, hakemliği yapan kişilerin yaptığı yorumları herkes göreceği için burada çok daha açık bir süreç söz konusu, çok daha şeffaf bir süreç söz konusu. Çünkü sizi o kadar objektif bir şekilde değerlendirmek zorunda ki onun yaptığı yorumları da o makaleye bakan herkesin görmesi söz konusu. O yüzden de tam bir şeffaflık ve açıklık söz konusu. Ben çok daha başarılı bir süreç olacağına eminim.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. We have a new question. It's in Turkish. I think
it is comment.
Yes, it's a comment.
Yes. Yeah, it's a comment. They are thanks to presentation.
Yeah, I'm very glad that our participants are appreciating the presentations and the importance of open science. I'm sure it will be one of the main subjects that we will have to consider cross-thematic. I don't see any other questions at the moment. I suggest we take maybe a 10-minute break so that we can grab a coffee and get back here for the last presentation from Ellie. Of course, you participants can post questions to the Q&A. We will have another Q&A session at the end, so we'll respond to all questions that we received by then. So it's now 15:28. I suggest we get back in 15:40. Is that okay for everyone? You can stay tuned and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
I will also share my presentation. My contact
course.
is over there. Whenever they want to ask any question, they can send me an email or
Of
call.
course, of
I
course.
can try to explain.
We have uploaded the presentations in the help desk. I will send the link to all participants, and everything is available there. Thank you. So see you back in 10 minutes. Okay, I think we're back. We can start again. I hope that everybody has returned. So our next presentation is about the open science workflows, tools, tips, research data management, and will be given by Eli Papadopoulou. She's a participant in Open Air project, a node for Open Air in Greece, and a researcher at Athena Research and Innovation Center. Eli, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Perfect. All right, hopefully you can now see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm Eli Papadopoulou. I work for Athena Research and Innovation Center, and I'm the Greek node for Open Air. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to take part in those efforts that have, as a common goal to foster good practices in responsible research and innovation, and one part of that is open science. So really glad to see also what the European Commission from Alea's presentation is doing, but also what Turkey has done and how open science has evolved within the Turkish environment during the last years, also in Gültekin's presentation. So my presentation will actually take all this information and try to provide some workflows in order to understand how you can then practice open science. So it will get more into practicalities of the open science principles. It will also have information about some tools that you can use and some tips. The contents. This is the overview of how the presentation will go from now on. We'll start with open access, then we'll move on to understanding what the research data management is, and more closely and in more detail about the processing of data within data management activities. We'll touch upon anonymization, and then about data management plans, which are required by the European Commission. So regarding open access, starting with a very common misconception that if I share my research, I'll be scooped. And just to note here that I don't remember. I know that our audience is diverse today, but please note, I would suggest that you take all those presentations, find all the arguments, and then use them in your proposals also when you write proposals, because open science, as already mentioned also by Odysseus and by the previous presenters, is the default from now on in the European research and innovations environment. So a common misconception is if I share my research, I'll be scooped. But on the contrary, if we share our research, then we have benefit, the advantage over its pre-registration in the global, let's say, research area. You can pre-register your research using this source that is offered by the Open Science Framework, and it's very easy to do, and you can provide it if there are conflicts at a later stage of your research. If you find someone else is doing something, you can prove that by doing this, you can prove that you started first, let's say, working on this research and having these results. So, more into the details of the open access in both publications and research data. So you heard from the previous presenters that we are talking about journals and repositories, and that is because not only open access not only touches upon the access part of having a publication available and being able to read it and access it, also preserving this publication and this data in the long term. So having a storage which will stay there and will secure our outputs in the long term. And this is the part of where the repositories play mainly. And hence, why to have open access, we need two things. We need to deposit our research outputs in an institutional repository, and here we secure preservation, and then provide open access either from this repository directly, which is called Green Root self-archiving, or complementary within publication for a journal that is in open access. Here you see a basic workflow that a researcher has done all the experiments, has produced some output, some results, and has written a paper and is about to publish this paper. Before doing that, in order to comply with the open access mandates, they have to check this source, the SIRPA Romeo source, which includes a very large catalog and lists all the major and minor publishers, and provides core information about their policies, and there we can consult it and see if our publisher that we want to publish for their journal allows open access, and how it allows us to proceed with open access, because there are different types. We'll see in a minute. So having checked whether the publisher allows us to have open access, then we move on to finding, to selecting this journal. We pay article fees. I think they are already mentioned by the previous presenters. These are fees that the publisher requires in order to make all the reviewing, all the publication processes, let's say, are paid based on those fees, which may vary from 200 euros to 2,000 euros and so on. There is not a standard fee that you pay as an APC yet. And if you pay, this means that you immediately have your paper in open access on the publisher's side, which is good, and this complies with what the European Commission wants. However, even if you provide open access from the publisher, the European Commission wants you to still go to the repository and deposit a version of your published article in the repository, so that the article is preserved in the long term and is accessible also from the Green Root. Then this is for if we want to publish things in an open access journal. There are two different kinds of journals. There are the open access journals. We pay the fees, we have open access. They are the subscription-based journals, which are those journals that our access to them is provided by libraries. Libraries pay fees, pay a huge amount of money every year to gain access to the full text of the journals. So these subscription-based fees that we get access from the libraries, we do not have to pay article processing fees, but we have to again provide a version of the paper in a repository. And there you might see sometimes that those publishers, those journals in the policy, which you will have consulted from here, you will see that sometimes embargo periods apply, meaning that some journals say that we allow you to deposit a paper in a repository, but not before 6 months after the publication in our paper, in our journal. And please know, I think already Alea mentioned that the embargoes that are allowed from the European Commission are no longer than 6 months upon publication, and no longer than 12 months for the social sciences and humanities. So if you check the publisher's policy and you see an embargo more than 12 months, I would suggest you to discard it from your list of suggested articles, of suggested journals. Please do not take this into consideration to publish there. Of course, there are journals that follow a more hybrid approach. They're both open access journals, so they both require article processing charges, but they are also taking money to provide access to the published papers by the libraries. So they have a two-way of gaining fees to provide access. Here, the same applies as the gold route. We pay the APCs and we have immediate access, and then we again store a version of our paper in a repository. Please know that as you already saw in this workflow, everything has to be also deposited in a repository, regardless of what route it is considered by you as a researcher. So deposit to repositories even when the gold route has been chosen. Apart from publications, we have the data that can be deposited and shared openly as well. And these are the data that validate our scientific findings in the publications, and they can be shared along with those publications and upon the publication of the paper in order to comply with mandates. We talked about when to deposit it, the embargo periods. And another thing that we should take into consideration is the metadata that we provide to others, metadata that describe our publications and our data, what the publications are about, who are the authors, etc. There, we should be mindful and also acknowledge the funders with words like this. European Union, Horizon 2020, in your case, maybe it's TÜBİTAK, and forgive me, but I'm not aware if you have already established such a way, a standard way to acknowledge TÜBİTAK. I'm not aware of it. The name of the project is one thing added in the metadata. The acronym and the grant number, the publication date, the length of embargo period, and the persistent identifier. So most of these, if you pick a trustworthy repository, most of these are checked. They have already done this for you, so you will be able to comply without having to put too much thought on complying with every point that you see here. So maybe Gültekin or someone else can explain a bit more of how these are met in the repositories that you presented before. What to deposit? In the publisher's policies, in the journal's policies, you will find 3 different versions that are allowed. Not all simultaneously, but depending on how the publisher feels like, they may allow one or another or all of them. So the versions that we can then add to the repositories are the following: are the preprints, meaning the final draft as submitted to the journal before the reviews. So this is called the preprint. Either it is that one or it's the postprints or the manuscript. So the final version with reviewers' comments, but without having the layout of the template that the journal is using. So only after the peer review and the comments are addressed. This is the postprint or the accepted manuscript version. And finally, some publishers may be more flexible and allow also for the editorial PDF to be shared in repositories or the published version, meaning exactly what we see on the publisher side, we can take it, download it, and add it on the repository. And these are, again, some criteria that we have to meet when we deposit in repositories. For the gold route that we mentioned before, you can find open access journals in this global database of open access journals, the directory of open access journal, DOAJ. There you can search by if they require APCs, publication fees, and there are different other filters that you can use to refine your search. And select an appropriate journal that is open access. You can also see the licenses that they allow the paper to be shared afterwards. And this is one of the things that you have to bear in mind, because Alea also mentioned that some specific open licenses are allowed in the new Horizon Europe. If you don't want to wait for publishing in an open access journal, because we know how much time it takes. It might take from 1 year to 2 years for the publication to be, from the submission of a publication to its actually publication on the website. Because there's peer review, there's other processes that interfere in the middle. If you don't want to wait that much, and you are also you want to comply, let's say, on a higher level with the European Commission, they have worked with F1000, which is a publication platform, and they have implemented their own open research publishing platform. It's called Open Research Europe. You've already heard from that, which is now open for submissions, of course, and it follows all the good practices or the fair principles. So the outputs are reused, can be reused. They are offered licenses. They are offered DOIs, which is part of the fair principles that other speakers have already mentioned. So it already does the work, let's say, for you, because not only it has those in place, but once you submit the article, the editorial team checks again for you the policy, if the policies have been met with the publisher and with the publisher and so on. So if everything is all right for you, and then there's a rapid publication in just 14 days. It's on the platform. You start receiving you get a DOI immediately, and then the open peer review publication starts, meaning that there is a peer review database in the Open Research Europe publishing model. There is a database with peer reviewers, and peer reviewers are open, meaning that both the names of the reviewers and the reports that they produce are openly shared and attached next to the, as annotation next to the full text of paper. And it is strongly encouraged, besides that, it is strongly encouraged for new article revisions to be added and to be linked with the original publication in this model. Moving on to the green route, there are some repositories that you can use. There are some good sources that you can search and select repositories from. One is the Directory of Open Access Repositories. So if you are not sure if you want to check repositories, also you can browse repositories by country. So you can search all the Turkish repositories available. Maybe your institution has already one and you're not aware of it. You can search under Sherpa OpenDOAR open directory of access repositories. And another way that you can find, another source that you can find repositories is the OpenAir Explorer, which harvests not only repository content, but also papers, data, software, and other research outputs, and gathers everything on a portal, on the global open access portal, let's say. And here you can also check, like we have more than 17,000 repositories, I think, from all over the world, including the OpenDOA repositories, because we harvest this source as well. Zenodo, you cannot, Zenodo is not a source where you can find repositories. It's a source where you can deposit immediately your publication. It is very easy to use, it's free, and you just have to log in and start uploading your paper and adding basic metadata like author, the acknowledged funder, and so on. Please know, this is very common, that please know that the ResearchGate or other commercial repositories or providers where you can upload your paper and your research outputs is not valid repositories. Also from the Commission, it doesn't meet compliance because they are not privacy. You know, there are certain privacy issues that are not met. They are not following the open fair principles. Of course, similar to when you post something on ResearchGate, we cannot harvest it. For example, on OpenAir, it's something that does not guarantee that it is open access in many ways, and licenses interfere there. Many things are not done in the proper scientific way. And also, yes, I wanted to mention that also when you post, when you have a list on your project website with all the publications, this is also not considered open access. You have, it's good to have them in one place on your website, very good for communication and dissemination purposes, but you have to add them in a repository so that you get a DOI, so that you have complete metadata on the, as it is required, and so on. So start planning early on, and this is our suggestion. And we see here 3 different stages: the proposal stage, during the project stage, and after the project. What you have to bear in mind during each of the phases are the following. So during the proposal phase, you can outline the open science, let's say open access elements in your dissemination and exploitation strategy. So how will the results, for example, be shared? How will the data be managed and shared, and so on? You can and you should include all the publication costs and data management costs during the proposal, so that you get a better idea of the budget. And please know that you will be needed for those activities. And please know that publishing all articles in APC-based open access journals might not be ideal. And this is why ORE, Open Research Europe, is good, because it minimizes the costs for us to comply with the open access mandate. You can also combine, of course, we already touched upon that, not only publishing in open access journals, but depositing in repositories. And you can specify that as a strategy, again, during the proposal writing phase. So when you were in the project phase, the accepted project phase, we can include provisions in the consortium agreement, so where to deposit, who is responsible, so go into more specific details on the deposition and the responsibilities allocated across the partners for open access and open science. We can implement the dissemination strategy, report and at reviews, so provide reportings during reviewing periods. And we can keep track of the issues, ask for advice, publish your embargoes, repositories for specific materials. Of course, we're here to help for that, and we are happy to do that. Also happy to collaborate with the national contact points. We are already doing, some of us are already doing that in our countries. After the project ends, we have to, before actually the project ends, we have to say who will be responsible or how we will allow and enable open access if an article is published after the project ends. So we should take care of that as well. Sorry. Who takes care of the depositing in the repositories after the project ends. If you want to check the APCs before selecting a journal, you can find an open database of article processing charges under Open APC. Here, I've already added the links here for you. These are hyperlinked. You can check them once you get the slides, and you can find information and make a more informed, let's say, decisions based on that and your budget. You can check the funders' policies. We already mentioned that, and the embargoes and what types of material you can deposit in this under Sherpa Romeo here. Other things to consider is, and we saw that happening in the past, when open access to publications was not that mature, let's say. But you might find it. You might already find it. If you are in an ongoing project, for example, and you are you have already published somewhere in a publisher, but then you realize after this session today, you realize, you go check the Sherpa Romeo policies, and you realize that they don't allow you to provide open access to the paper, to any version of this paper at any repository. That is a problem, of course. That is a major problem because it doesn't qualify. Doesn't meet compliance. So you can get this model addendum and modify it and send it to the publisher, requesting to just make an exception because you are working in this project, which requires you to have open access, and the European Commission has these mandates and so on. So you just describe the case to them, and most of the times, they, like 70%, they reply back and they make this exception for you. But overall, we see that we're in 2021, so nowadays, more and more major publishers already allow open access, so this is very rare to find. But in any case, if you find it, please know there is this template that you can use. You can send to the publisher and request for exceptions regarding open access. For the licenses, if you are not really sure what to use, what license to attach to your publication or data, there are some tools that can guide you and help you. There's the open license selector by the Creative Commons, which has to do only with Creative Commons CC BY, CC and C and D, and all the Creative Commons attributed licenses. But there's also the URAT license selector, which you see here, that you can use. And it has more in the portfolio. It has more licenses in the portfolio apart from Creative Commons, well, including Creative Commons. And you can also check for licenses for your data, for example. And of course, we mentioned that one of the things that you should consider is to acknowledge the funders. And to guarantee the reuse of the outputs, you should choose open licenses. So Creative Commons, which are 4 criteria: BY, SA, and C and D, as we already saw. And it has to do with how researchers, how open researchers are to remixing, to let's say comfortable they are with people just taking the output as it is and sharing it in their fora, in their research activities, just by attributing them and so on. So there are differences, different variations of how things can be shared under these Creative Commons licenses. Regarding patents, so here we see on the first, let's say, image, we saw a workflow regarding the publications mostly. So here we see a whole workflow, including the research data. So we see there is a research that's been done. Three core concepts, three core topics are that we need to have in mind are the dissemination plan, the research results, and the data management plan. And having them, we then decide how and if we want to openly share those results. First, let's take the patented route. If we want to patent, of course, we have to decide first if we want to exploit and protect our data, and then we patent them. So maybe we're not allowed to provide open data, for example. In all other cases where patent is not involved and there are no sensitive data involved also in the processing of in the collection of our data during the research, we can decide how and where to disseminate publications. We already touched upon that, gold route, green route, and we are okay. And then for data, we have we can deposit them in repositories, data repositories that are particular for data curation and data preservation. And we can share them openly, free of charge, or have restrictions on the access of the data, like provide passwords if we don't want them to be openly shared, provide passwords that require the researcher that would like to get this data from us to send us an email and so on. So these are kinds of restricted access that can be applied to the data. Please be aware that if you don't follow some of these workflows and some of these tips, let's say that there might be sanctions. Grant reduction or payment suspension are two of the sanctions that were at least in the Horizon 2020 grant agreement. So moving on to research data management, we saw about open data and open publications, but more importantly for research data management, it doesn't have to do only with how we share the data, but also how we handle the data throughout the research process. And here I really like this quote. It reads, "Publishing research without data is simply advertising, not science." And I really like this, and I agree. We see also that, I mean, we know it, everyone can publish whatever they want, right? Of course, there's a peer review process, but many times we see, I see, at least there is a very good website. It's called Retraction Watch, and there you can find live and real examples of bad scientific research results, research papers. So they have, although they are published in major publishers, like no, I'm not going to mention which publishers, but in major publishers, supposedly they have been undergone under peer review. They are fraudulently, they are fictional. For example, there was one for which there was one paper that a researcher from Malta, and I can find the link and share it to you if that's of interest. A researcher from Malta was making links with their Star Trek which is a fictional movies, a series. They were making a link about medical health and Star Trek, and this was really fictional, and this was retracted. The article then was retracted. So we see those examples exist, and that's why we need research data to validate those findings, to raise, let's say, the prestige and the level of our research, the research we produced in the institution and nationally also in all levels. But research data, when we talk about research data, what research data do we mean on those mandates? We mean the data that are used as key sources in the research process, such as numeric data, text files, images, and sound files. They might be data collected from sensors, for example, from seismographs, or they might be experimental data coming from the physics scientific field, like for those data coming from the Large Hadron Collider is a very good example at CERN. Any types of data, mostly digital or digitized in the form, but also please remember that they are also analog physical data, like from archaeology, from the archaeological field, where the excavations, first, they are analog, they are physical data, and then they can be digitized and become digital data. So different forms and different, let's say, types and uses of data that exist. And one of the things that we need to ask ourselves before we select those data to be published is what data are necessary to validate our findings, because these are the primary data that we want, and these are the primary data from the mandate. And secondly, there are some disciplines like the 3D modeling, for example, which are very, it's a very complex, let's say, field. In those fields that produce models, that's the 3D models, another question that you can answer is what files are necessary to constitute a model. These are the ones that you will need also to deposit on repositories. Why manage data? Other speakers have already said that. Of course, we understand that it makes our research easier. It limits the loss of information and the loss of this data. For example, if our laptop gets off, stops working, or if our USB or our hard drives are stolen or lost, we can avoid accusations of fraud or bad science because the data validate our findings. We can get credit similarly to how we can do in publications. We get credits and acknowledged for writing this publication. Similarly, we can do with data, and so other positive examples apply here. Fair data principles are at the core, as already mentioned, of the European Open Science Cloud and of the European Open Science framework in general. So what that means is that the data must be findable by both human and machines, accessible through repositories and access conditions, interoperable with other systems and technologies, and reusable by others. And you see what this entails for each one of the principles. So we need to have metadata, we need to provide versions of the data, track of the provenance, we need to have licenses, we need to have vocabularies that are standard vocabularies in order to describe those data so that others can understand them, PIDs, and all these different examples that not only we as researchers have to comply, but also repositories and services have to and already integrate those principles and implement those principles in the service providers side, because FAIR principles actually apply to both service providers and consumers, let's say the end users, researchers. This is why the EOSC is very important, because it secures that all the services and tools that are there are fair enabling to the data that we are providing them. Apart from fair, we have open. Fair and open might look alike, but they're not. Fairness is something that can stand alone. Something can be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, but not open. So you cannot have it openly shared. And there are, of course, different levels of openness on the data. And this example is from the 5-star open data of the Tim Berners-Lee. First star, let's say the minimum openness, we ensure when we publish something on the web. Then to increase the openness, we attach an open license to them so that people know how to reuse it, because having it on the web, sometimes it's confusing if you don't know how to reuse something. Do you know if intellectual property rights are in place, for example? We don't know. Then we can provide an open license, so we are we increase the openness. Then to increase openness more, we make it available as structured data, so not an image of a scan of a table, but the Excel itself. We also make it available in a non-proprietary open format, CSV instead of Excel, for example. Of course, we can have everything in Excel. It's how we can, if we are familiar with working with Excel, but we should always convert and have as additional the open format of this Excel of this output, this output in open formats as well. And to be fully open to our data, we can use URIs and make links so that other people can point at our stuff and link to our data to provide more context. Here you see again what I was talking about, that fair and open might look similar, but they're not. This is where they interact, intersect, and these are the principles, the let's say aspects where they don't. And of course, once more, as open as possible, as close as necessary, we recognize that everything cannot be shared openly. For example, clinical data or sensitive information from trade secrets and so on. So for research data management, you can see, you might have already seen, there are life cycles that provide more context on the different steps that are involved in a research data management life cycle. These are all the things that I've included here in this slide, but they have different expression. So they all have to do with the same steps, but expressed differently according to the particular institution and how they are viewing research data management in their institution. The core, let's say, steps involved are the data creation, when we create or collect the data processing, the data analysis, data preservation, data access, and data reuse. So all here have to do about those steps. And I'm going to get into more detail about this, about the steps. So in the hypothesis or the planning phase, let's say, or the creation phase, some other life cycles you may find. It's where we plan our research and we consider all the financial requirements to our research. So how our data management activities might cost, how the open access activities might cost if we want to publish to 5 journals, for example, that require APCs and so on. Then, then we move on to the data collection. Based on the hypothesis that we have, we collect our data, or we produce our data, or we reuse data. It depends. So we get this pool of data that we are about to use later to process them and and have concrete results to show to the community. The data collection has the following, let's say, steps. Clarify the usage rights and ensure that you give credit through citations if we are reusing, for example, data. In the processing phase, having collected the data, we move on to processing the data, and we make use of open source software and open interfaces. This also limits the cost of the data management activities if we do that. Storing data and results, having processed them, or before or during processing, how we store and where we store them. We can make use of service infrastructure. If there is one in our institutions, we can attach a persistent identifier to our data. We can attach descriptive metadata to our results and publish metadata with an open license. We can then preserve them in the long term through repositories and use services that secure and safeguard the preservation. These are the repositories, and produce standard metadata. Again, these are ensured and secured by the repositories, the repository providers. And then, having preserved them, we can decide if we want to publish them and how we want to publish and distribute them with the metadata that have open license, with the use of open evaluation, for example. These are our options. Ensure links between publications, data, and methods, and this can be done through the opener interface. We connect all the different, we make all those links for you, and make use of institutional repositories, again, for providing the open access to the data. And in the reuse step, we clear citations and we ensure the accumulation of credits. When someone reuses our data, we make sure that we have provided them with a citation method, with a citation example of how our data, we would like them to cite them. Tools to finding our data are the following. We can find data in our Explore page, explore.opener.eu. We have more than 1 million datasets interlinked with publications and software, and you can find projects and datasets, applications, and link to the project. You can find metadata standards if you are not familiar with the metadata, or you're trying to find a particular standard for your discipline. You can use the metadata directory offered by the Research Data Alliance. You can find it under this following link, and you can choose a metadata standard for your data, discipline-specific data. You can find repositories for data under Re3 Data, Registry of Research Data Repositories, and you can refine your search, browse by country, by discipline, domain, by levels of trustworthiness of repositories, if they have undergone an ISO, let's say, certification, or if they have another Core Trust Seal certification. So other aspects, other attributes as well can be searched by to find where to deposit your data. You can archive data and software, of course, in Zenodo. We've already said that. And you can create communities in Zenodo where you can have a community for COVID, for example. You can have a Turkish community where you can publish things and things like that. And one thing that is secured, again, by the repository side is the PIDs, persistent identifiers. Data should have data and metadata should have persistent identifiers, meaning not only for, there are different varieties, different categories of PIDs. For digital objects, this is the most common, and this is what we should have for sure. The DOI, digital object identifier, or you can have other systems like Handle. They also produce digital object identifiers, or ARC, or some national ones. There are different systems that can help us with providing a persistent identifier for a digital object. Then we have identifiers for researchers and organizations, like the ORCID for individual researchers, and the funder registry from Crossref for funders IDs. And for other activities like projects, we have the Australian RIDE, which is mostly used in the Australian community, but it's good to see that the PIDs evolve and move on to different activities to include different aspects and activities of the research data management lifecycle. How to share? Please know that of course, we see that happening. We see that when we work together, we might share outputs between us through commercial clouds like Google Drive, or through cloud infrastructures like B2Share, FTP servers, USB drives. These are all things that we do in our everyday activities, but please know that commercial cloud drivers and USB drives are not considered best practice, because commercial cloud might take, there are specific, again, privacy settings that might interfere with specific open science principles, and USB drives might get stolen, or we might stop working after a while. So we should protect data, and I understand that sometimes it's easier to use those tools, commercial tools, but at least have a backup in another type of provider, like B2Share, which is an institutional provider and infrastructure for data from institutions or an FTP server, and create links with other outputs. We've already touched upon that. To provide access, there are different things that you can do. I think I already touched upon that. There are different levels of access and regulations, conditions, and security requirements. Here you can see a nice chart by the UK Data Service. You can check how open your data are, if they are open, if you are sharing them as open data, as safeguarded data, or as our controlled data, based on those criteria. Licenses, I'm not going to go through this again, but what I wanted to remember about reused data in particular is that we have existing data. These are the primary data that we collect. We are interacting with those data for the first time. It's our data, let's say. Sorry. The opposite. Existing data are data that we find somewhere. Someone else has already produced them and shared them and offered them publicly available. So we find them, for example, in a data center, or in a commercial or whatever website. They exist, and we want to reuse them, right? Example, those data might have DOIs, might be in repositories, or we may find them elsewhere. There we have to make sure that we understand how we can reuse them, so that we don't get into any copyright infringement activities later. And these we have, if they don't have DOIs, and if they cannot the copyright is not identifiable, we should be sure that before we use them, check, undergo through a copyright clearance process, check if they have licenses clearly stated somewhere, and make all the necessary actions before we reuse them. And in order to avoid producing trouble to our researchers, to our colleagues at a later stage, so that they don't undergo through these processes, and they find it more clear, and they understand how, in a more clear way, how they can use our data, we have to, when we produce our data, we have to add the licenses and add state the access conditions that we expect other people to follow to access our data, so that they know, it's very easy for them to know how to reuse them. And again, I'm not going to go into that. It's the tool from the Creative Commons about how to use your license. And in terms of fairness of data, if you wonder okay, if you have done all of this, if you have undergone all of those steps, you have used all the tools, etc., but you are not, still you're wondering, okay, so how fair my data are at the end of this process, you can check this tool by the ARDC, which is called Fair Self-Assessment Tool. You can, it's very easy to use. Just answer to the questions. So there are some predefined questions that you can answer, and you get a score at the end saying how fair your data are, but also how findable, accessible. So it isolates the different principles, and it shows you different scores throughout the completion of the process. So moving on, and I know that I probably don't have much time, moving on to processing of data, processing sensitive data, we have a method that is used which allows us to more openly share those data. It's called anonymization. You might have already heard about anonymization, and you might have already used tools that anonymize the data. First of all, why do we anonymize data? You see that GDPR limits the usage of personal data. So we want to use data from human activities that contain valuable information. The COVID pandemic is a good example for this, but at the same time, the data that we want to use is threatening to the privacy of citizens. For example, if movement data are at stake, they can reveal detailed information if studied a lot. So data anonymization tries to protect the privacy of a user. Some cannot recognize a user or make inferences. So we cannot recognize a user or make inferences for a specific person by looking at the anonymized data. But at the same time, data anonymized are produced, data anonymization produces anonymized data that are as accurate as possible, so that data analysis is feasible. There's a difference because you see that there is anonymization, but there's also the notion of pseudo-anonymization, and the difference is defined in the as it is defined in the GDPR, and also as it behaves differently in practice, is that the pseudo-anonymization or a naive anonymization, let's say, that simply replaces direct identifiers like names, social security numbers, or any other kind of specific identifier that clearly describes a person, results to pseudo-anonymized data. This means that if someone can make the link again to the original person, everything can be revealed and no privacy is really hidden, since reverse engineering on the data is possible. There is no guarantee that that a third party can use the data to go back to the original person, example in mathematical ways, or by using secondary identifiers if they combine the data. And here is an example of from the Massachusetts states of USA. For reasons of transparency, hospitals published anonymized records of treatments. You can see those here on the left-hand side. And they removed name, social security number, etc. So they provided publicly all data on the left. And at the same time, there was publicly available data set of voting data. So people that have voted on elections. They could find a publicly available dataset, again anonymized, on another catalog publicly. The common identifiers here, the zip code, the birth date, the sex, could be identified if we combined those two catalogs. So we could identify, go back, and link person to treatment. Sorry. So the GDPR makes a distinction between pseudo-anonymization. It clearly states that pseudo-anonymized data are not anonymized data, they are personal data, and the whole regulation applies to pseudo-anonymized data. The basic difference is that it defines pseudo-anonymization as something that can be reversible, but anonymization is not. Of course, this depends on the techniques that are being used on the anonymization tools. For example, if you're using anonymization tools and the different methods, GDPR states that anonymization methods, such as those provided by amnesia, k-anonymity, differential privacy, which give a guarantee that they are irreversible, produce anonymous data that are no longer personal data. So then the GDPR does not apply to them, and we can share them following all the good practices that we saw previously, and as we would normally do according to them. When to anonymize, when we are a practitioner and we want to share our data with others. Of course, after the data is anonymized, we do not need consent, so it's easier for us. There's wider freedom of how we can share those data. When we want to give data to recipients we do not fully trust, and encryption encryption is another method, let's say, of securing the data, but doesn't reduce the risks if there are data leaks. When we want to openly publish data and we are not fully aware of the audience, we can anonymize them, and when a reduction in information quality is acceptable because there might, for example, be some hard cases where this should be, this is the way to go to just reduce quality of information in order to openly share the data. Amnesia, again, is a tool where you can do all that if you download it and install it on your laptop. And regarding the data management plans, which actually have described all those activities under those DMPs, let's delve into more details about them. So having done all of that, or actually before starting processing our data, before starting analyzing our data, collecting our data, and so on, we have to plan those activities, and we have to plan them and describe them on a data management plan, short for DMP. A data management plan is nothing more than just a text document which describes, again, those activities that we have undergone for the data. The data management plan is a deliverable and a living document, meaning that we can go back at any time, and we should go back at any time and edit and update it according to new data modifications or new data collected and new activities undertaken around data. And it documents processes undertaken throughout data management lifecycle, including the costs. What is not a method, again, people might confuse or have again another misconception. Let's say it's DMPs are not research assessment method. So the data management plans also state how the activities have been costed. Costs for data management plan are eligible costs, and they have to do not only with the person months that are required to handle those data or to work on those different data activities, but also for the services and the infrastructure that is used. And again, we saw previously that it's better. We suggest that it's better to use open infrastructures and infrastructures that are open source or institutional, that preserve our data and have already in place best practices, rather than going to paid options like some people might want to analyze their data with using a particular package of software that they have to pay for, and then that package might not work at the end or might not be compatible, let's say, with what's happening under the open science spectrum. So these are things that you should bear in mind when costing the activities. And of course, if you are going to patent your data, there are some costs might interfere and affect the patenting process. But I think you already know, you've already heard from a different training about this. So I'm not going to go into much detail. To write your data management plans, Opener has developed a very flexible and open source and configurable tool, which is called Argos, to plan and follow your data activities. It's very easy to use. You can configure it to your domain standards, to your institutional needs, and you can also extend it if you want to add, to push new features through our GitLab repository. Why to use Argos? I mean, it's just a tool, but actually, I would argue that it is not just a tool. And here we see what is the value added for Argos and the extra functionalities that it offers to the open science community. So Argos supports the full DMP publication lifecycle, meaning that it doesn't only support the generation, the production of data management plans, but also their publication. So to close this life cycle, the publication, as it integrates with Zenodo and offers the option to, just with a click of a button, to have your DMP published in Zenodo and getting a DOI according to open and fair principles that are attached to Zenodo, of course. So our outputs there are as open and fair as possible. It also produces machine actionable DMPs. And what we try to do in Argos is to normalize the descriptions of the data. This means that we actually push towards normalization of the data, not only interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary data sets to support domain protocols and standards to be configured in the templates for those particular cases, but also we allow for multiple data sets to be described in single DMPs. And that is important as the approach is data-centric, so that different types of described data sets are handled appropriately. We see that there are different criteria that need to be met for produced data, for reused data, other criteria for reused data. We saw that before. We have to know where the copyright, if there has been a copyright clearance process, if licenses are there, and so on. Also, not only for searchers but for reviewers, it's different workflows as well. Sensitive data, again, before publishing those data, we can exclude from this DMP all the sensitive information and then publish the DMP. And overall, we try. By having this approach, we try to give control over an individual dataset rather than all datasets mixed in a single DMP record. Argos is also interlinked and connected with reference services and data sources, Opener, EASC, and so on. And we thrive in collaborating with others and communicating and exchanging knowledge with others, sharing ideas, because this is an evolving data management plan. It's a rapidly evolving topic. We try to standardize some of those practices, like working with different repositories to properly expose those DMPs with the appropriate resource type. Our main users are researchers, research projects, research communities and institutions. This is how a DMP output looks like in Argos. This is how links and all the added value processes that are, the processes that are underlying the output that everyone sees on their screen, connected to different partners and enhancing the overall open research graph, which has entities. Open entities about research outputs, about funders, about other things, and so on. I can go into much detail at another webinar. I think I'm already off regarding the time. Here are some useful links. Many thanks to my colleagues Irina, Emma, and George for sharing some of the slides. And thank you very much. I'm happy to get questions and provide answers at this stage.
Thank you very much, Ali, for your very comprehensive and complete presentation. We will upload this presentation as all other presentations in our help desk. This is available. I have two questions for you. Can Argos be used for national TÜBİTAK projects, or is it only for EU projects?
It can, yes. Actually, you can have localizations. We already have that. We worked with the Izmir Institute to provide this localization for Argos, but we can have more integrations, particularly with TÜBİTAK, for example, and connect with some registries that they might have, connect with other workflows that they might have to simplify the administrative process and check indicators with them if they want to monitor things at a later stage. This can be done as well. So yes, the answer in principle is yes, but we have to collaborate and work together towards that.
Very good. I have another question. Is Arxiv a valid repository in terms of European Commission open science policies?
The archive, okay, the archive is for preprints only. Yes, it's a valid one, but you should consider also publishing if there is a possibility to publish the postprint as well, or the published version. But yes, it is acceptable. Maybe Gültekin wants to add something also in this Q&A.
Evet, geçerli bir arşiv ama yine de preprintleri içerdiği için kendi kurumunuzda bir kurumsal arşiv varsa daha sonradan makalenin postprint halini ya da verilerini de eklemeniz gerekip makaleyle bağlantıyla getirmeniz gerekeceği için kendi üniversitenizde var olan uluslararası standartlarda bir uluslararası kurumsal arşiv varsa arşivden daha iyi bir seçenek olmuş olur yayınlarınız ve bağlantılı bütün çıktıların bir arada olabilmesi için. Yeterli olduysa cevabım.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we covered quite a few things here today. We discussed about open science policies. We discussed about the tools. We gave some very comprehensive presentations on the use of these tools. I have one more question. Let me check. Yes, thank you. Thank you notes. I'm glad that you find these presentations useful. As we move towards Horizon Europe, we will have more presentations on that. I want to announce here that we will also organize a focus group training, again with the help of OpenAir. Sometime in April, we will announce that soon, and this will be a much more comprehensive training, and we will have the chance not only to present the tools, but even to test some of the tools and see how these tools work in your projects and how you can implement them. I have a question in Turkish, maybe.
Maybe I can add something. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, of course.
But regarding the question about Argos, just to say that I don't think I mentioned in my presentation that we are already working with Cistera, which is a consortium of funders for funding, national funders funding ICT projects, and also with the FCT from the Portuguese funder. And we are, of course, again, as I said, happy to collaborate with more people across other nations.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you.
Turkish one is a comment. If you have a question, how we are going to contact?
Yes, we will, as I said, we have already uploaded all the presentations in our help desk. The help desk also allows you either to post a question to us or comment on the end of the page, so you can post there a question, and we will try to respond to that question as soon as possible with the help of our speakers. So it's still interactive. You can ask whatever you feel that wasn't very clear to you. I would like to thank all our speakers for the really fantastic presentations, very comprehensive presentations that they gave. And I hope we'll have the chance to sit together in the future for the next presentation. I'd like to thank the participants for their patience and really useful questions. And I hope to see you again in one of our next events. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.